Hi, welcome to this presentation about researching Black Revolutionary War soldiers. This presentation is going to focus mainly on the state of Connecticut. That is my area of expertise. However, the techniques can be used for most other states. I have been doing this sort of research for the past 5 or 6 years, and I have published my research on Black Governor Samuel Huntington, who was a soldier during the Siege of Boston. I am also in the process of researching 5 men from the town of Montville, Connecticut, who served. A long-term project I'm working on involves a man by the name of Calvin Goddard, who was the mayor of Norwich, Connecticut for many years, also a lawyer and a judge. And he was on the defense team for the Prudence Crandall trial in 1837. And during a speech that he gave at that trial, he mentioned the fact that he had assisted 19 Black men in obtaining their Revolutionary War pensions. So I've kind of made it my mission to identify those 19 men and to tell their stories. That's a work in process. Also, I've recently been contacted by both the Pomfret and Plainfield, Connecticut historical societies to do research on Black veterans from their town, Black soldiers from their town, and do presentations on that subject. And this is in conjunction with the 250th anniversary coming up of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Of course, we're really starting this year in 2025 because it was during 1775 that the Siege of Boston, the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Lexington Alarm, all those important things occurred in the lead up to the actual war. So a few things about Black soldiers in the Revolutionary War. And these are all estimates. No one will ever know exactly how many men fought in the Revolutionary War because the records simply were not being kept like they are today. As an example, the Siege of Boston started in April of 1775. George Washington arrived there in July of 1775, and no one could tell him how many men were in the encampment surrounding Boston. They actually had to kind of go door to door counting to get some sort of an idea of what the force was that he had to deal with there. Lexington Alarm, a lot of organized militia groups from Connecticut headed north at the Lexington Alarm, but also a lot of men simply picked up their muskets and headed north. So we'll never really know the exact numbers of soldiers, and certainly we'll never know the exact number of non-white soldiers, both Black men and Native Americans. However, the numbers do seem to kind of correlate to what the population was at the time. About 31,000 men from Connecticut fought in the Revolution. About 800 to 900 of those were non-white, which is about 3%, which correlates with the percentage of Black versus white in the general population at that time. So this is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to find a starting point. If you're interested in this sort of research, there can be several reasons why. Researching your own family genealogy, if you're involved in a local historical society or are just interested in your local history, or just plain curiosity about these people and their stories. Because we're talking about Revolutionary War soldiers, we are going to be looking at military records, Fold 3, previously compiled records, and regimental histories. And then we're going to talk some about standard genealogical practices to do this research. I have been practicing genealogy for well over 30 years, very familiar with Connecticut records, and most of those records can also be used for this research as well as for the white European population. And just kind of a comment here at the end, Google everything. Don't leave Google out of your toolbox. Googling these men's names or the regiments that they were in or information about the Battle of Bunker Hill, all of these can bring up really interesting information. And I find a lot of stuff just simply by Googling. So how do we get started? I'm going to show you 3 publications that will help you get started on the names of men who fought from or enlisted in various Connecticut towns. This first one is put out by the Liberty Fund, and it was published about 2014. The Liberty Fund is trying to raise money to put up a monument in Washington, D.C. to honor Black Revolutionary War soldiers. So this is research that is helping in that effort. They have several states involved, and each state is broken down by county. They came up with a total of 820 Black soldiers from Connecticut, which correlates with the numbers I gave you before, from 80 towns. Now, remember, at the time of the Revolutionary War, some of these Connecticut towns simply didn't exist yet. They weren't established until after the war. They were broken off from bigger towns. That's why you don't see any Black soldiers named from that town, because it just happened later. And there were a couple of towns where there simply wasn't any Black presence at the time. Some of the newer towns, some of the further north towns. So the fact that they're from 80 towns, there's a couple of different reasons for that. And this is what you're going to see if you open up this PDF online, and it is for free. And it's broken down by town, and they have listed the names of the non-white soldiers that they have found in these towns. And I mentioned I was working on both Plainfield and Pomfret, and these are the lists for those towns. You'll see some of them have simply first names, Cujo. Some of them have first and last names, Finnehass, Mullet. This list, unfortunately, does not give any sort of citation. It doesn't say where they found this information, but it's a good starting point if what you're looking for a list of names for a monument, or if you're looking for a starting point to do further research. This is a good place to start. The DAR has also published a list of non-white Revolutionary War soldiers that they've discovered. This was published in 2008. It is also free online, available as a PDF. You can Google Forgotten Patriots and find this. And what this contains all 13 colonies. So what I did is I downloaded this PDF, and then I printed to PDF the pages that involve the Connecticut men. So I've got saved on my computer PDF of the Connecticut men that they have listed. There are some errors in it. There are some men that are not listed. I don't know if they're planning on an update in the future, but it's a good starting point. And this is what you're going to find in this list. This is part of the Connecticut list. You'll see again, some have first names only, some have first names and surnames. Where they were from, you see Cato Grover there, African-American from Norwich. Now, all those initials that are stuck in there are kind of like citations. It's where that information came from. Connecticut State Library, the Connecticut Historical Society. You'll see here in a couple of them, it says SECT : with a page number. That's Black Roots in Southeastern Connecticut, a book that's a great resource if you're looking in the New London area. So you can go to their key and find out what these sources are, where this information came from, which makes a great starting point for further research. And the third one I'm going to talk about was published by the National Park Service, by the Boston National Historical Park, in 2002. This was prepared and mostly researched by George Quintal. There are, again, some errors and omissions here, but in 2002, this was really groundbreaking research and a wonderful thing for the National Park Service to have sponsored. And this is what you're going to find in the George Quintal publication. He does actual individual biographies. They did some cursory research on all of these men, and you can find a lot of information here, and it gives you some citations. John Ashbro was born circa 1753. That little superseded one there refers to a citation that'll be at the bottom of the page. This again is a great starting point for research. You're going to want to look at what their sources were and continue your research from there. So you found a couple, one, two, half a dozen men that you want to research. Starting in military records is a great starting point. And the main source for researching military records these days is a website called Fold3. This is a part of Ancestry. And if you subscribe to Ancestry at one of their levels, some of their higher levels, you can get this free subscription to Fold3. I subscribe to Fold3 as a separate subscription. It really is a great research for anything military. How to use this is you will want to put some search terms there in the search box. And here's an example. This is one of my 19 men associated with Calvin Goddard, Peter McGarrah. I've done a lot of research and published my research, and there's also a YouTube video about Peter McGarrah. And just bringing him up by name in Fold3 brings up his Revolutionary War information. Now, if you look over on the left-hand side of the page, you can see that you can also use this site to research Civil War, both Union and Confederacy, War of 1812. We, of course, are just going to be looking at Revolutionary War records. And you'll see here I can look at Peter's pension application file, his final payment vouchers. These can be very interesting because it can tell you, it'll give you the date of death and who the final payment was sent to. In the pension file, you can find marvelous information. You have to be able to read some of this writing. Some of it's legible, some of it's illegible. But this is just the cover page for Peter McGarrah's file, and I believe his pension file runs to some 80 pages. But look at the information you can get just off of one page. He was in the Connecticut Rolls, gives his a year of death is 1827. His name, the fact that he fought under a Colonel Sherman. He was a private in the Connecticut line. He did obtain a pension. Now, remember, this is a pension application file, but this tells you that he did obtain a pension. He got $8 a month starting in March 1818. He was one of the early applicants. And it tells us that the certificate of pension, which is number 2080, you see up at the top of the page there. And that certificate was sent to Calvin Goddard, Chelsea Landing, which is part of Norwich, Connecticut. Now, of course, you're only going to find these if the man lived until after 1818. Now, in 1818, the government started accepting these pension applications for soldiers, but it only took them 2 years to make some revisions. And the major revision was that the former soldier had to prove that he needed this money. They didn't want to be paying pension monies out to wealthy men. So in 1820, they all had to reapply, and they had to verify what they had for assets, debts, and who their dependents were. And this is what is really interesting. For example, here, this is Providence Freeman, another one of the Calvin Goddard group. Says he's been a laborer, but I'm wholly unable to work due to a very bad rupture. I have a wife named Zuba, age 32, and just kind of note there that Providence Freeman, having fought in the Revolutionary War, is quite a bit older than 32. So he's married to a younger woman, Zuba, and they have a daughter by the name of Zuba, who is 6 years old. Now, this is only going to list his dependents. Providence Freeman, being an older man, was quite likely married before, may have other adult children, but they're not going to be listed here because they are not dependents. He has no property, real or personal, except for the following, and he's got, a couple of chairs, a kettle, a spider. His total assets are $1.43. Now, he has not listed any debts. Poor men were not loaned money very often, then or now. So this is his total assets. He's got two dependents. His total assets is $1.43, and he is dependent on this pension to feed this family. If you think that's bad, here's a worse one. This is John Freeman, another Calvin Goddard associate. I've been a laborer, but am now blind. I have no property. I've been supported by public charity for several years before I obtained my pension in 1818. This is 1820 when he's reapplying. He's blind. He has nothing. The shirt on his back, basically. Very much dependent on the government for his support. Another record set that you can find in Fold 3 is this compiled service record. This is for Pomp Raymond, who is one of the 5 men from Montville that I'm looking at. And what this record set is somebody went through all of the muster rolls that are existing for the Revolutionary War, and they noted down the numbers of the documents that each person was associated with. So you don't have to go through multiple muster rolls to find your soldier. You can look here. And this is a card file, and you can page through it and see various times when they were accounted for, and sometimes what they were doing at the time. For example, here's Pomp Raymond, muster roll dated January 5th, 1779. It gives the date that he enlisted, June 6, 1777. And his term of enlistment was for 3 years. And if you look down at the bottom, you'll see that in January of 1779, he was sick and he was in New London, possibly in a hospital, possibly recuperating somewhere near home. He was a member of Captain John McGregor's company in the regiment commanded by Colonel John Durkee. This is Eber Raymond, another one of those 5 men, also a private in Captain John McGregor's company. This is his muster roll summary from August 4th, 1778. He enlisted on June 6th, 1777 for the term of 3 years. Down at the bottom, you see he is cutting wood. Very frequently, Black men in the ranks were assigned to things like cutting wood. Not a romantic view of fighting in this Revolutionary War, but a very necessary role. I mean, just imagine how much wood a moving army uses, both for heat and for cooking. Eber spent most of the war cutting wood. Here's a pay record for him. Again, this is still in that compiled military file. He's still with Captain McGregor. This is January 1st, 1779, and he was paid until February 1st at the rate of $6 2/3 for the month. Doesn't sound like much, but it is equivalent to a white soldier's pay. They were all paid really lousy wages. For the most part, Black soldiers were also issued weapons and other equipment pretty much equal to the white soldiers' pay in equipment and weapons. This is probably the most integrated army that we would see again until World War II. This is an actual muster roll, and this is why I talk about going through these card files rather than going through the muster rolls. This one is actually pretty legible. Some of them are not. This is a muster roll for Colonel Zebulon Butler's regiment, Enoch Reed's company. And it gives a list of everyone who's in that company. First, we see the officers, sergeant, corporals, the fifers and drummers, and then the privates get listed after that. And this is where those notes come from, as far as, being sick, being in the hospital. Now, I like to browse through these muster rolls because you see who else was in the company, who were the men's associates during their time in the Army. And if you look down the list of privates here, you can pick out several names who may or may not be Black men or Native American. For example, Exeter Freeman, Peter Mohawk. Down at the very bottom is a name that's familiar to me, Lebbeus Quay. I know there are a lot of people researching Lebbeus Quay. I don't know why, whether it's the name that's catchy or what, but he is associated with Calvin Goddard. He's one of the ones that I have not started to research yet because it seems like everybody else is. So I'll just talk to them later. Now, I talked about Googling everything, and Fold 3 has a lot of information on it, but there were also published works in the past that are still valid for research today. And here are two of them that you can find online for free in this Internet Archive. This first one here, Rolls and Lists of Connecticut Men, was published in 1901, and Record of Service of Connecticut Men was published in 1889. They have a lot of the same information in them, but really worth looking at because it also will give you a bit of the history of the unit, whether or not officers stayed with the unit for the entire time, what soldiers were killed, what soldiers died of sickness. And because they're on this Internet Archive, they're thoroughly searchable. Here's Providence Freeman, one of the men that we looked at his pension application earlier. I can just type his name into a search box, and I do use the quotes so I get the exact name. And it will take me directly to the page where he is mentioned. I use these frequently, and I suggest you check them out too. You can Google Connecticut Men in the Revolution, and you will find both of these books here on Internet Archive, all for free. So let's talk some about genealogical resources. I could give a 2-day workshop on genealogical resources, so we're just going to go through a few here. First and probably most important for this research is vital records. Vital records, birth, marriage, death, kept by the town in some cases, the church in some cases, and sometimes both. On the left here, you'll see from the Barber collection. Now, this is typewritten. This is a transcription of the actual vital records from Connecticut. And these are the town records that were accumulated by Louis Barber. And down towards the bottom there, you're going to see a listing for Ishmael Magira. Talked about Peter Magira earlier. Ishmael is someone who I believe is his son, and I see that he was married in Hartford in 1830. Now, if I want to look at that actual record, and you really want to do that, you want to go look at the actual record, you're going to go from, this record was found on Ancestry. You want to log on to a place called familysearch.org. And you can actually go to the Hartford Vital Records to Book 1, page 78, and see the actual handwritten record. A transcription is a transcription. It is subject to error, so you always want to check the original. Also on Ancestry, we have compiled church records. This one is from the town of Colchester. And you'll see right there next to Colchester where it says Gideon Quash. Gideon was another one of the Calvin Goddard group. And it looks like he had a daughter that died. Other than the fact that it lists his daughter as Negro, you'll notice that none of the others really say that these are African-American individuals. Your research is going to have to turn that up. If you go back to Hartford, Ishmael McGarrett doesn't say anything about their color. This is a town record, and it was just something that they didn't keep track of. Again, with the church records, if there's any question about them, you do want to go and look at the original. When you're looking at these church records or town vital records on Ancestry in this typewritten format, always page to the end of the listing. They're alphabetical. Go past Y, go past Z if there is any, and at the end, they're going to have a listing for people with no surnames in the original records. Now, a lot of these are white women who, for whatever reason, when the record was made, they didn't list their surname. However, you will frequently find African-American people here who were not known with a surname. And this one is from the town of Preston. And it's a little confusing. Nancy Pomp Huntington, daughter Miriam was born, slaves of Robert Crary, all these question marks. This is something that you're really going to want to go to the original record and see if you can make some sense of it. And you'll see here that this is the Barber collection. So this is town records. If you go to familysearch.org, you can look up the Vital Records Book 2, look at page 406 and see this original record online. Or if you're close by, you can go down to the town clerk's office and ask to see that book. Technically, the town clerk has to ask you for a membership card of a recognized Connecticut Genealogical Society in order to view those records. And if you're going to be doing this research, I suggest you join one of the societies and get one of these membership cards. Connecticut Society of Genealogists is the biggest one in the state. Their membership rates are very reasonable. Newspapers. I use newspapers all the time in this research, and it's amazing what you can find. There's two main subscription newspaper sites. This one is Genealogy Bank, which is what I use. The other one is associated with the Ancestries, and it's called newspapers.com. I would suggest before subscribing to either of them, although some Ancestry.com membership levels give you free access to newspapers.com, but look and see what newspapers they carry. I do a lot of research in the New London County and Southern Windham County area, and Genealogy Bank carries a full run of the Norwich Bulletin, which is the second oldest newspaper in the United States. So I find a lot of information out of Norwich on Genealogy Bank. And down the bottom there, you'll see, once again, we're looking at Providence Freeman, died in Colchester, sometime before Tuesday, March 16th, 1824. And I really like this entry. First of all, Black men or women or children were very rarely given a mention in the newspaper when they passed away. This is one that was. I have found other newspaper information about Providence Freeman. He had some wife troubles earlier in his life. I've also found where some of them have been charged with various crimes and whatnot. You're going to find all that in the newspaper. But in this entry, it says he's a Revolutionary pensioner, but also mentions there have died in the vicinity of Colchester within the 2 years past 5 other pensioners, and it lists their names. Now, these are just pensioners. It doesn't say that they're Black pensioners. In fact, it doesn't even say that Providence is Black, but it lists their names, and I can tell you for certain that Caesar Beaumont is a Black Revolutionary War soldier, another one of the Calvin Goddard group. And Cuff Smith is almost certainly a Black soldier. So there's a couple more names you can research too. Census records are the darling of beginning genealogists. Census records from 1850 through 1940, which are available online, can be a wealth of information because those census years list every member of the household, their ages, their occupations, where they were born. after 1880, their relationship to one another. Prior to 1850, the census takers only listed the heads of household, and then it was broken down how many boys of a certain age, how many white males of a certain age, and then also the same thing for women. And then over on the far right-hand side in this slide, you see the column for free people of color. All other free persons is the actual heading. This is from 1800 in Norwich. And I found this record when I was searching for Simeon Simons, another one of my Calvin Goddard group. Took me a while to find this record. Simeon is also often misspelled as Simon, and Simons is often misspelled as Simmons. So I did a search on Ancestry by SIM star with the first name and SIM star as the last name, and I found this record where he's living in Norwich. There are 3 persons in his household. Unfortunately, we can't get any other information from this record other than location and that there were other people with him. Those 3 people might be Sim, his wife, and a child. It might be Sim, 2 completely unrelated other free people. We cannot tell that from this record. We can't make those sort of assumptions. Up above that, we see that there's a white man named Philip Turner who has 1 free person of color in his household. If you do lots of research on Philip Turner, you might come up with that person's name. Up above there is a very typical listing with just a first name, Will. In many of the census records, especially before 1820, Black heads of households were listed just by their first name. Sometimes it would say Will Negro. But you quite often find them like this. Now, I know who this Will is, who had 7 people in his household, because he's listed next to his brother, Archelaus Tracy. William Tracy is another one of my Calvin Goddard group, and I know that he had a brother named Archelaus because I found a court record where William and his brother Archelaus were arrested for stealing used lumber from a building site. So I know that these are 2 brothers. I know that that's William Tracy in the listing. Without having done that workaround research, I would not be able to know that. Other problems with census records as far as doing this sort of research, other than the fact that they were disrespected by not breaking down their family groups and disrespected by not giving them surnames. Here is our king of disrespect, Lodowick Fosdick. He was a census taker in the New London County area in 1810. And he doesn't have any descendants, which is a good thing, because I think I would go track one of them down and wring their necks, because Lodowick Fosdick is, in my mind, the worst census taker ever. He took the census in 7 towns in 1810: New London, Groton, Waterford, Montville, Lyme, Preston, and Colchester. And he did the same thing in all of those 7 towns. Now, those 7 towns have been broken down into even more towns in more recent times after 1810. So this affects a lot of the New London area research. Now, what did he do that was so bad? This is the first page of the enumeration for Preston, which Lodowick Fosdick was the enumerator. Now, we notice that the first dozen people that he enumerated, if we look on the right, all of them had large numbers of other free people living in their households. How unusual. It took me a while to figure out what happened, but this is what this probably is. Lodowick was too enamored of himself, or too lazy, or too something to bother to enumerate even the heads of households of free people of color. So when he came to one of those families, he simply stuck them by number up at the top of his listing. So Sally Morgan, the first person listed, which was a household of 3 older women, did not have 6 other free people living in the household. That is a separate household. We cannot know their name. They were just stuck in the top here. Now, this can cause problems not just for us doing this sort of research, but imagine if you're researching your ancestor Samuel Rockwell about halfway down the page there. And all of a sudden in 1810, he has 9 free people of color living in his household. You would be pretty bewildered as to what that was all about. Geez, was my ancestor a slaveholder after all? I didn't think so, but look at this. So big disservice done to both sides of the panel here. I think it would be possible with research to find out who at least most of these families were. As I noted at the beginning, I'm already doing 4 large research projects. I'm not willing to take this one on now, but I think it would be an interesting thing to do in the future is to identify who these missing families are. If you're researching someone from Hartford, you are in luck, perhaps. In 1805, Hartford conducted a census of all Negroes. Now, the entire census doesn't exist. It's just 3 pages. But if you're researching someone who happens to be on one of those 3 pages, you are in luck, because this gives the name of the person, their age, and you notice that their age is years, months, weeks, and days. Very few Black people would have known that information, didn't know their exact birth dates in many cases. It tells you the former master, the former residence, and some other information here. And then don't forget, in the far right column, their character. We had to know whether or not this was a good Negro. At any rate, if you're researching someone from Hartford, this could really be a great resource for you. Probate records, hugely important in doing any sort of African American genealogy research in Connecticut in the colonial era, especially. And this is an example of what I'm talking about. This is the will of Nathaniel Huntington of then Windham, Connecticut, what's now known as the town of Scotland, Connecticut. Nathaniel Huntington is the father of Governor Samuel Huntington, the president of the Second Continental Congress at the time that the Revolutionary War basically ended. I am on the board of directors for the Governor Samuel Huntington Homestead Trust in Scotland. I got involved with them because they were looking for somebody to research this particular sentence in this will. And it says that he is leaving to his wife, Mehitabel, all my indoor household goods and my Negro woman called Nancy to be hers during her natural life. Nancy was an enslaved woman who lived there in the household. If it wasn't for this one sentence in this will, we would never know that she existed. I've tried to do quite a bit of research on Nancy. I have managed to find out who her previous enslaver was and how she ended up in the Huntington household. We don't know what happened to her after the death of Nathaniel Huntington. We don't know. I have figured out her approximate age. Don't know when she died. Don't know anything else about her. But at the household there, we do have a room dedicated to Nancy's memory. And I'm glad that we know all about Nancy. In probate, a recent update to the family search catalog is super important. Family search is part of the Church of Latter-day Saints, and they have spent the last 60 years or so traveling the globe, filming original records. They had put those original films onto microfilm, which you could go to their library in Salt Lake City and look at, or you could rent those films at a local family history center and look at them. Almost all of that microfilm has now been digitized. And they have started a new project, and this is still in the early stages. You have to go to familysearch.org labs to find this full text searching option. And I say this is very important because you could dig things out of these probate records that you would have never found in a million years doing standard research. I did a full text search on the name Edward Pelham. This is another one of my Calvin Goddard group. By the way, one of the few African-American veterans I have found who could read and write. I see that in 1802 in Plainfield, he's listed in the estate accounting for Phinehas Pierce, a white man. And he and a man named Alvin Wilson were paid $1.60 out of the estate. I'm assuming that this was for digging a grave. They got 80 cents a piece for that. But this helps me to place Edward Pelham in Plainfield in 1802. He moved around quite a bit. He was either in Plainfield or very close to Plainfield in 1802, and that can be an important thing. Also listed here is Job Parkus. I know that there are some links between the Parkus and the Pelham families already, so I am going to be researching Job, and I'm not sure who this Alvin Wilson is yet, but I will be researching him to see if he has other links to the Pelham family. Full text searching, great breakthrough. They're adding more digital records to this search group all the time. They do have Connecticut probate on there now and many other records. Deeds. I love deeds. I always look for the people I'm researching in the deed indexes for the towns that I know that they lived in. For example, I just found out that Edward Pelham was in Plainfield in 1802. Did he own property there? Well, no, he didn't, but it's something that I'm going to look for every time. And you find other odd things in deed books, not always just property transfers. But this is how important these deed books can be. This is from this example is from Marlborough, Connecticut, book 3, page 101. I showed you military records before for Peter Megara. This is the same guy. I know it says Peter Megara, but it's the same guy. I'm not sure of the reason why. Sometimes it was a B and sometimes it was an M at the beginning of his name. I have a couple theories, but anyway, here is Peter Megara of Marlborough selling property to an Ishmael Megara of Hartford. Seems a little bit odd. From this record, I'm going to make a temporary assumption that Ishmael Megara is the son of Peter. He's certainly a family member. I can't think of who else Peter would have been selling property to at this time, except a son. He was quite elderly at the time, so less likely to be a sibling, but possible. But I've looked through vital records, I've looked through church records. I can't find any birth record for Ishmael. I have found some birth records for other children of Peter, but not an Ishmael. So I kind of tentatively assigned Ishmael as a son, but I don't know that for sure. But through deeds, I wanted to see, just curiosity's sake, what happened to this property? This property was very important in Peter Megara's life. Did Ishmael keep it for a long time? Did he sell it? What happened to it afterwards? And I found that Ishmael had sold the property to an Asa Day and David Lord of Marlborough. So I went one step further to see the deed when they sold the property, which was very shortly after they bought it from Ishmael. They sold it to a John D. Watros of Colchester. And it's 21 acres with the remains of a dwelling house, being the same land which was owned by Peter Megara and afterwards by his son, Ishmael Megara. This is the only document which positively links Ishmael Megara as being the son of Peter Megara. If I hadn't done my deed research, I would never be able to say this for sure. As I mentioned, you can find other records in deed books. And one of those things that's very important to us is manumissions. This is from Norwich, and this is the actual manumission of Black Governor Samuel Huntington. This was an application by Jabez Huntington seeking to set free his servant Samuel. Now, at that time, this is, you can see the big date in the middle there, 1781. The selectmen had to approve these sort of things. You couldn't just enslave someone until they were too old to work and set them out on the streets and say, oh, you're free now. There were laws against that in Connecticut, thank God. But so they had to be examined by the selectmen as somebody who is able to support themselves and wants to be free. Certainly a germane question. So Samuel, servant to Jabez Huntington, was freed on June 25th, 1781. Now, one other thing about this record that I want you to look at is bottom left-hand corner. This was recorded in 1787, January 24th, 1787. Why 6 years after he was freed was this recorded in the books? And I have a theory about that. Samuel was freed in 1781, lived his life as a free person until he died in 1811. Jabez Huntington died in October of 1786. Jabez Huntington was a very wealthy, very powerful, very intelligent man who lived in Norwich. He was the general of all the Connecticut troops during the Revolutionary War. He had 4 sons who also became generals, Jedediah Huntington being the most famous of them. My theory is that while Jabez was living, Sam didn't have to worry about his freedom. He had Jabez to vouch for him. After Jabez died, he might have started feeling a little bit shaky about that, about, somebody might question whether or not he was a free man legally. So he had this recorded after the death of Jabez. Just a theory, but it seems to fit. But these are the kinds of things you want to look at when you're looking at any sort of records. Look for the details. Court records. I can't stress enough how important the Connecticut State Library is to doing this sort of research. They have online databases for researching African Americans in Connecticut. This is a snippet from one of them, New London County Court Records, and they have pulled all of the African American or Native American related court records from a few counties in Connecticut, New London being one of them, and they have an index online. So you can search this by name, but more importantly, you can then contact the library to get the actual court records, so you'll know what happened. There's 2 cases here where John Jackson is suing someone named Tracy, trying to get the freedom of his son. Now, that might be something that's very interesting to you. What I would do to further your research is on the Connecticut State Library homepage, there's a little button you can click. There says Ask a Librarian. Just email them, give them the details off of this page and say, is this court record available? And I can assure you it is. Sometimes if it's a short one, they can simply scan it and they'll email it to you. Or they'll tell you that you have to come into Hartford to see it, in which case you'll email them, tell them what day and time you're going to be there. They will actually pull this ahead of time, so it's waiting for you when you walk in the door. You don't have to wait for records to be pulled. In some cases, these records have been digitized, and the librarian can direct you to that website to look at the record online. In any case, all of it's very helpful. There's some really important information in these court cases. Any other questions you have about court records, other places in the state, ask the Connecticut State Library. Their staff there is fantastic and will be more than happy to help you. So that's the basic standard genealogical resources we're going to talk about today. But I also want to talk for just a minute about the genealogical proof standard, and I'm going to tell you a cautionary tale. If you're going to do this research, I really want you to do it well. It's really easy to do bad research. It's a little more trouble to do good research that's going to stand the test of time. The genealogical proof standard consists of 5 elements, and you can look this up online. Just Google genealogical proof standard. And these are the elements that they're using to try to help you to do accurate research. Reasonably exhaustive research, complete and accurate source citations. You'll notice in some of the records that I've been showing you, I've had just little snippets of citations associated with them, so you know where the records came from. Analysis and correlation of the collected information, resolution of any conflicting evidence, and we find conflicting evidence all the time. Was he born in 1750 or was he born in 1753? You have to be able to justify those differences in the records. A soundly reasoned, coherently written conclusion. I used to write lots of little biographies of people in my research. I don't necessarily always write them up anymore. I do a lot of video presentations, oral presentations, not so much writing anymore, although I really need to get back to it, but times change. The 2 that I'm going to talk about specifically today are reasonably exhaustive research, meaning you have to look at all the possible records, and analysis and correlation of those records. Here, for example, I mentioned that Black Governor Samuel Huntington had died in 1811. How do I know that? I don't know it for certain. This is the death record that I found in Norwich. Samuel, Negro, no last name. This is at the end of the listing. Died December 28, 1811 at age 60. What makes me think that this is Sam Huntington? Well, I can justify that assumption in several ways. First of all, the location. He lived his entire life, except for his time in the service, in Norwich. I found him in the 1810 census. He is not in the 1820 census. That age, you're going to find when doing African-American research, the ages are always approximate. He was about 60. That would be about right for what I know previously researched about Sam. This leads me to say that this is most likely Black Governor Sam Huntington. I don't know absolutely for certain, but in my write-up, and I did write this up about Sam Huntington, this is most likely his death record. And I gave the reasons that I just told you about why I think that this is him and that this is his death record. So this is a reasonable assumption to make, a kind of a leap of faith, but this is reasonable, and I can give you reasons why I think it's so. Here's my cautionary tale. The work I'm doing for the town of Pomfret, Connecticut right now. When I first started talking to them about doing this, I asked for the names of a couple of, known African-American soldiers from Pomfret that, I could use as a starting point. And the first name that they told me was Asaba Grosvenor. So one of the first things I did was Google Asaba Grosvenor, see what I could find out about him. And I found multiple websites with this information on there. On the left is a painting by John Trumbull. The title of the painting is Lieutenant Thomas Grosvenor and his Negro Servant. John Trumbull was at Bunker Hill. This is a scene from Bunker Hill, the death of Dr. Warren. he knew Thomas Grosvenor and the other people in this painting. Okay, so this is a reasonably accurate depiction of a scene from the Battle of Bunker Hill. This is a little study from the larger painting, and this is owned by Yale University. And their description says that the servant was long thought to depict Peter Salem, which in my mind is kind of dumb anyway, because Peter Salem was from Massachusetts. Another story. Recent research suggests that he represents an enslaved man known as Asaba. Recent research. Good news for me. I can go to that recent research and skip a few steps. So like I said, there are multiple websites with this information on it, and they all seem to point to that recent research as being the George Quintal publication from the National Park Service, which I talked about earlier. And this is his entry for Asaba Grosvenor. At the Battle of Bunker Hill, slave Lieutenant Grosvenor fought against his owner. 1790 census of Pomfret, Thomas Grosvenor lists his household, 1 free non-white person and 2 slaves. And then it goes on, the vital records of Pomfret mention a man named Asaba, a Negro, who had a son, James Peter, who was a slave in the Grosvenor household in 1794, at which time he was freed on his 25th birthday. That sentence doesn't even make sense to me, but we'll get back to that in a minute. Asaba is most probably, kind of strange language, the slave who stood by his master at Bunker Hill and was then the free man of color living in the Grosvenor household in 1790. This seems like a big leap of faith to me, okay? But I'm going to go on and look at these actual records and see, do they make sense to me? This is the listing from the Barber collection up at the top there, typewritten. Thomas Grosvenor had Negro James Peter, son of Asaba, born November 30th, 1794, entitled to freedom at 25 years of age. This is actually a birth record for James Peter. This isn't when he was manumitted. The Gradual Emancipation Act of 1784 asked that the births of any enslaved people in the household be recorded because they were legally due to be freed when they turned 25. So they're recording the birth of James Peter in 1794, and he's going to be eligible to be freed on his 25th birthday. I want to look at the actual record, the handwritten record, and that's what's down below. And you see it starts there in the blue section. James, that doesn't say Peter, that says Foster. James Foster, born of Asaba, servant to Thomas Grosvenor, Esquire of Pomfret, entitled to freedom of 25 years. A couple of different things from the transcription that appears in the Barber version. It's James Foster, born of Asaba. I'm liking this less and less and less. Some of the websites I looked at made mention of the fact that Asaba was later freed. Well, is there a manumission record? We talked about manumission records. I trotted myself over to the Pomfret Town Hall, which is not very far away. And I looked at the index, which led me to Deed Book 9, page 288. And sure enough, here's a manumission record for Asaba. To the selectmen in the town of Pomfret, on the application of Thomas Grosvenor, Esquire of said Pomfret, desiring to emancipate and make free his Negro slave, Asaba. Okay, it's 2 S's, but it's the same name. We have examined said Asaba and do find that said Asaba is under the age of 25. That should read 45. These people being emancipated had to be between 25 and 45 years of age, not older than 45. So that should say under the age of 45 years and more than 25 years old and is in good health and desires to be made free. But this isn't until 1802. So obviously not the free person of color in the 1790 census. And there's a second paragraph. I, Thomas Grosvenor, am proud for the state of Connecticut to emancipate and make free the above named Asaba, my slave, and that she forever hereafter be a free woman and hold the name of Asaba Nichols. Asaba is absolutely not the person depicted in the John Trumbull painting. Somebody did not do their thorough research, did not correlate the records that they found, and misattributed this person pretty badly. And now there are dozens of websites, institutions, well-known institutions, Yale, Museum of Fine Arts, et cetera, that are going to have to be contacted and correct their online records about Asaba Grosvenor. Your cautionary tale: do thorough research, look at the records, examine them, correlate the information in them, and try to do your best job at researching. That's the end of my presentation. You have my email address from the first slide. If you have any information on any of these people I've been talking about, I always love to hear from you. If you have questions, feel free to ask. This is like my favorite subject in the world. Always willing to help fellow researchers. Thank you very much for listening, and please subscribe to my channel and watch more of my webinars. Thank you.